When they discovered Eve, the scientific community was buzzing. There had been instances of feral children throughout history, but none as odd as this. They found her in a mine shaft that had collapsed years before. No one much cared about the mine until a new developer wanted it reopened. They certainly did not expect to find a child amongst the rubble. Her age was estimated between 6 and 8. Evacuators also found 2 human skeletons alongside her, presumably those of her parents. It was believed that her family had been exploring the mine when it collapsed, causing them to be confined in a space about the size of a large dining room. They most likely survived on rock condensation and insects. It was unknown how old Eve was when they became trapped. Her parents must have died rather quickly. Their skeletons showed years of decay. Despite this, it seemed Eve was fond of rubbing the bones on her skin. Certain bones, including the woman's pelvis and the man's skull, were nearly polished when they were found. Eve showed no signs of being taught to walk or speak, although she did make skittering noises with her tongue. Instead of walking on 2 legs, she preferred walking on her hands. This made her palms extremely thick with calluses. When she walked, her spine curved so that her thighs were close to her head, similar to the tail of a scorpion. When she was discovered, she fought viciously to stay in her hole. It took 2 grown men 3 hours to pry her from the rocks. They came out of the encounter with a variety of bites and bruises. Eve screamed for 2 days straight, not stopping to sleep or drink. Finally, she collapsed from exhaustion. Everyone was thankful for the silence. There was much debate as to who would take Eve. Clearly, it had to be someone who understood abnormal child psychology. Many scientists threw their names in, but only one rose to the top: Henrietta Wrom. She was a brilliant young PhD with degrees in psychology as well as biology, mathematics, and engineering. She was in the process of setting up the Wrom Institute. This facility would specialize in studying childhood development in unique and traumatic cases. Eve fit the bill perfectly. She was transported to the institute, which was still in its infancy. Although the facility itself was incredibly large, only a few sectors were in working order. One of these was the Athena Ward. The Athena Ward functioned as a home for severely traumatized children. It was fully staffed with nurses, caregivers, and psychologists. Although one couldn't exactly fit into this population of misfits, Eve would at least find a suitable living arrangement. Henrietta was keen to observe every second of Eve's life. Her room was small. 3 of the walls were padded, while the last appeared a dark black. This was the 2-way mirror for which the scientists watched the girl. The room itself held few comforts. There was a cot with a thin mattress and pillow. In the corner was a small writing desk and chair. Otherwise, the room was completely empty. Eve's first day in the room was eventful. She woke up on the mattress after being sedated. Immediately, she flew off the bed and hid underneath the desk. The lights from above seemed to burn her eyes. She stayed that way, crouched on her belly, for hours. Her eyes darted at every sound. Henrietta sat patiently behind the glass, watching. Finally, Eve crept out from the desk. She walked as she usually did, on her hands. Her elbows were splayed like an insect's. She inspected the objects in the room with her mouth. She chewed on the wood of the desk and licked the metal of the cot. Eve seemed particularly disturbed by the cushion of the mattress. She grabbed it firmly with her feet and threw it against the wall. All the while she made inhuman clicks with her mouth. Her head twitched constantly. She was never relaxed. She sniffed the padding of the wall, attempting to taste it. Realizing she couldn't wrap her teeth around anything, she started to climb. Her hands acted as claws, and she scaled the side of the room. Her fingers bent in ways no ordinary humans could. She reached the very top, where the wall met the ceiling. Henrietta watched silently as Eve began clicking louder. It sounded as though she was having a conversation. The clicking lasted for a few moments before Eve dropped to the ground in a graceful leap, landing on her hands. She looked up directly into the black wall, directly into Henrietta's eyes. The next few days were odd, to say the least. An orderly would enter 3 times a day to bring Eve her meals. She refused to eat anything that was prepared for her. Usually she would hiss at the orderly and spill the food across the room. On the 3rd day, Henrietta suggested changing her diet from the typical fare to a variety of insects. Fresh grasshoppers were brought in a plastic bag and left at Eve's door. Once the orderly had left, Eve descended upon the bag, ripping it open with her teeth and devouring the bugs in large, meaty chews. Henrietta decided that all of Eve's meals would now consist of insects. Everything was served, from cockroaches to centipedes. Eve demolished each with no qualms. She even smiled when the meals were brought, a sight that looked strange on such a gaunt face. No attempts at therapy had been broached. Eve's violent nature and her distrust for humans made it difficult to even imagine sitting in the same room with her. Plus, there was her clicking. She constantly climbed the walls and skittered incessantly. She was clearly communicating, but not even Henrietta could understand who those clicks were for. On the 7th day, the breakfast for Eve was a plastic bag of spiders. The orderly left the bag by the door as usual, but Eve was distraught. She cried out in what sounded like pain. Instead of hiding under the desk until the orderly left, Eve lashed out at him. She slashed his cheek with one of her razor-sharp toenails. He screamed and pushed her away. Within seconds, she was standing on her hands again, ready to strike. Luckily, he made it out and shut the door before she could get to him. Henrietta did not react. She stared, transfixed, as Eve approached the bag. Eve had no interest in eating these creatures. Instead, she carefully used her teeth to rip a small hole in the bag. One by one, the spiders climbed out onto her arms. Eve made her usual clicking noises, but also small sounds of joy. It was almost like a regular child's laugh, except sharper. The arachnids swarmed her face, and she was practically giggling. There must have been nearly 20 spiders comfortably nestling in her hair and ears. Henrietta paged the orderly to come to her viewing room immediately. He appeared tired. A long red gash followed his forehead to his chin. Henrietta didn't even look at him.
What kind of spider did you feed her?
I don't know, Dr. Wrom.
Well, then you're useless. Find me someone with a brain.
She waved him off. Henrietta couldn't take her eyes off the child, clicking happily as the spiders made their homes on her skin. When Dr. Wrom wanted something, it never took long to appear. Within an hour, an expert on arachnids was at Henrietta's side. He was a nervous man who had no idea what to expect. When he saw Eve, he nearly ran out of the room.
Your name?
He jumped at Henrietta's voice.
Cooper. Dave Cooper.
Well, Dr. Cooper, I need to know what spiders those are.
Dr. Cooper leaned in. It was a hard thing to look at. A 6-year-old child walking on her hands across a padded room, covered in spiders. He lifted a magnifying glass out of his pocket and pressed it to the glass.
I would guess these are wolf spiders.
I don't care for guessing.
Yes, sorry, those are wolf spiders, definitely.
He broke out in a sweat.
Tell me more.
Her voice was strong and impatient.
Wolf spiders are fairly common in this area. They look to be more on the large side, about 1 inch in diameter. Oh, and they're sometimes referred to as the most maternal arachnid.
Maternal?
Henrietta turned her back to the glass to stare at Dr. Cooper.
Yes, I mean, not in a human sense, of course, but female wolf spiders will carry their young on their backs until they're old enough to survive on their own. This kind of protective behavior is unheard of in other arachnids. There's no way to measure love in a spider, but if any spider could feel love, it would be a wolf spider.
He had just finished his last word when an alarm sounded. Henrietta whirled around to see Eve's cell door open. She was gone.
What the?
An orderly ran in.
Dr. Wrom, we have no idea how she got out, but she's climbing the walls. We can't get to her.
Henrietta stormed past him.
Get the tranquilizer gun. She'll need to be moved to the Achilles ward.
It took 10 hours to capture Eve. She made it halfway across the facility, climbing the walls and the ceilings. Spiders of all sorts followed her from hallway to hallway. They rained down upon anyone who tried to get to her. It was Henrietta herself who aimed the tranquilizer and shot Eve in the neck. The girl crashed to the ground, spiders scattering like rats. Her arm broke beneath her. As instructed, she was moved to the Achilles ward. Henrietta never mentioned her to the public again. Upon inspection of Eve's room, 10 dead spiders had jammed themselves into the door lock so Eve could escape. It wasn't just wolf spiders. There were 4 different species that had sacrificed themselves for her. In the next month, Henrietta had the entire institute fumigated. Nothing could have survived the amount of toxins she pumped through the halls. The Achilles ward was heavily restricted, so only a special few had clearance to work there. Although many different kinds of screams came from those rooms, no one heard any clicking. With all the spiders dead, there was no one to click to. Eve's noises, the only ones that allowed her to connect to another living creature, went completely unanswered. Scientists believe that Eve survived in that mine alone. But it was only after she was found that she experienced true solitude.